Hello everyone. So today we are going to be looking at some elements of eco-criticism in Shakespeare's King Lear. So this is a play that all of you are very familiar with because in the last semester we had studied an adaptation of King Lear called Lear's Daughters from a feminist perspective. So here we are going to look at the original play itself, but we are going to focus on aspects of nature and how we can understand this play better using the various techniques that we have studied as a part of our eco-criticism paper. So this particular play is one of Shakespeare's greatest tragedies and it was first published in 1606. We are not going to go into the publication history or other details because those are not really very relevant to us in this paper. So let us just look at the main characters. You have King Lear, who is the king of Britain. You have his three daughters, Goneril, the eldest daughter, Regan, second daughter, and Cordelia, the youngest daughter. Then you have Goneril's husband, Duke of Albany, Regan's husband, Duke of Cornwall. Then the Duke of Burgundy was supposed to marry Cordelia, but then when Cordelia's inheritance was taken away, the Duke of Burgundy said, "I'm not going to marry a girl with with no money." So basically, he's not a very important character. Then the other important characters are a very elderly part of King Lear's court, uh, Gloucester. Gloucester has two sons, Edgar and Edmund. Edgar is his legitimate son, his firstborn, eldest son, and Edmund was born out of a illegitimate relationship. The other important character is the Earl of Kent, who is a very loyal follower of King Lear, even when everyone else, deserts him and he is forced to spend his time out in the storm. Kent is always with him, even though in the beginning of the play, Lear and Kent they have a disagreement. Kent basically says, you must not give up on your daughter. You must not believe that Cordelia is mocking you. So like that, they have a disagreement, and Kent is banished from the kingdom. But he disguises himself as another character called KS and follows King Lear till the very end. So he's a very noble character. And the last important character is the fool, which we can see here. The fool or the jester is a sort of an entertainer, but we see that often the fool speaks the most wisely. Although he is supposed to be a foolish fellow who entertains the king by doing acrobatics and telling jokes, in fact, he's one of the most focused, intelligent people in the entire play. Okay. So we all know the story, right? Lear decides to divide his kingdom and spend his old age under the care of each of his three daughters. But before he does that, he conducts a sort of a experiment or a test to see how much his daughters love him. The first two daughters, Goneril and Regan, they speak very highly about how much they love him, how he is more to them than their own life, etc., etc. Basically, they flatter him very highly. But Cordelia refuses to do that. She says, "I'm going to love you only as much as it is proper to love your father, and after I marry, I will give half of my love towards my husband, and I will be able to love you only lesser than what I love you now." So, like that, she speaks, the truth. So Lear is completely enraged by this, and he uh, takes away Cordelia's part of the kingdom and gives it to Goneril and Regan. Later on, he understands that this was a mistake because when he goes to his eldest daughter Goneril's house to stay with her, she says, all your followers are creating problems. You have to get rid of your followers. Otherwise, I'm not going to allow you to stay in my house. So Leah finally understands that his daughters are not really true to their word. He becomes extremely angry and he says, you're a traitor. It is better to have a serpent than to have a child who is ungrateful. So like that, he storms out of Gondrel's castle. He goes and stays with Regan, but there also the treatment is the same. Regan says, you cannot have these many servants following you. You have to get rid of all of them. In fact, you should not keep any servant, right? You don't need anybody. I will take care of everything. So like that. So this is when the key element of this play that we are focusing on happens. Uh, Lear becomes so mad that he basically loses his grip on reality, right? He becomes truly and literally mad, and he runs out into the storm which is raging outside, right? So here we have a king who, who loses everything. He just goes out into the storm and he says, I don't care, right? I will face the elements without any shelter, without any protection, uh, because my daughters have turned out to be such ungrateful traitors. Okay, so that is when we see the storm, which is a very powerful manifestation of nature, right? One of the most powerful forces of nature, and we have this king who is exposed to it, and that becomes the central ecological metaphor that we can see in this play. So we'll discuss that a little more in a little more detail. Okay. So this is a quotation from one of the papers which look at ecology in relation to King Lear, written by Steve Menz. He says, "The human experience of the natural world creates cold, wetness, and a need for shelter, as well as a dramatic estrangement that gets expressed in the king's madness and the temporary halt of the plot during the storm." Okay, so let us try to unpack this sentence a little bit. So, throughout the text that we have discussed, there is a distinction between nature and what is human, right? What is natural and what is artificial. So, instead of living as people or animals who are fully immersed in the natural world, we humans have created sort of a different environment which surrounds us, like an artificial space which protects us from the powers of nature. And the person who completely, or best signifies this artificial world is the king, because the king is, the person who rules over this artificial world, the kingdom, right? So a kingdom is composed of people living in cities and villages in all these artificial spaces, and the king himself lives in a palace which is well protected, which is the, the best example of luxury, completely, completely cut off from any kind of hardships which are caused by nature. But when a problem happens, when human relationships are broken, like in this play is basically about the relationship between parents and children, right? So that is a natural relationship, and when something happens to that relationship, when something goes wrong in that natural relationship, we find that this whole ordered existence of this artificial space is destroyed, right? We find the king exposed to a cruel, uncaring, powerful world of nature, right? So, along with this, we also see the king losing his grip on sanity, right? He becomes insane, he becomes mad. So, normally, the king is supposed to be the symbol of everything which is very, very normal, right? The king is supposed to uphold normal things in a kingdom like peace, justice, truthfulness, and reason. But here we see King Lear losing his grip on all of those things. He becomes an unjust person. He loses his grip on reason. He becomes a mad person. So all of that can be traced back to this deviation from what nature asks us to do, right? When something unnatural happens, like when parents turn against children, or when children are ungrateful to their parents, or children purposefully destroy the love that they have to their parents, the order of nature is broken, and all the problems that we see in King Lear uh, essentially comes from this unnatural behavior. So we'll talk a little more about that. So one more thing about the play is that it's a temporary halt, right? A halt means a stopping. Normally, when a storm happens, nothing nothing works, right? I think at least some of you may have gone and seen the movie 2018, which is currently playing in the theaters, right? Which is about the flood which happened in 2018. So you can see that when the flood is happening, people are all abandoning their normal lives, right? They cannot do the things that they usually do. People cannot go to the office or the school or the college. Normal places are turned into shelters, like schools and colleges become camps. Everything, all the entire normal rhythm of life is completely upset. So the same thing happens here in the storm. The storm signifies something which is unnatural, something which is against what is proper and accepted. Right. So during that time, the story also stops progressing. We have two complete scenes in this play where nothing happens except people, except characters wandering about in the storm. Okay. So yeah, so it's a temporary halt to the plot which happens during the storm. Okay. All right, so let me begin discussing some of the things that we have just seen in more detail, like how the world is essentially divided into these two realms. One is the realm of things that are natural, and the other is the unnatural realm, things that are not proper. So, proper is natural, and improper is unnatural. Okay. So, what you see in this picture here is called the great chain of being. Right. This is a philosophical idea which was very powerful during Shakespeare's time. So, what this picture represents is the entire structure of the universe. Okay. So at the top of this picture, at the very center, the top of the picture is God. Right. God is the central ordering force in this whole universe. It is because of God that the entire natural world exists in harmony. And then the picture is drawn in such a way that the entire universe is divided into very proper sections, like you have God, and then you have angels, and below that you have mythical beings like saints, uh, supernatural beings, and below that you have the human world. All kinds of people are represented, and then below that you have birds, you have sea creatures, you have animals, trees, natural features like mountains, rivers, etc. And below everything you have hell, where you have demons and spirits and things like that, and also the souls of people who are sinners, right? So this entire thing is called the great chain of being, because there is a chain which you can see running through the whole thing, right? And it is all connected to God, right? All the things in nature are somehow in relationship to God, right? So there is a very famous quotation from one of Robert Browning's poems called Pippa Passes. So in that poem he says, God is in his heaven, all is right with the world, right? So as long as the proper order of being is maintained, as long as God is in his heaven, the king is on the throne, everyone is doing their proper thing, then the world is fine. But once this system, this arrangement becomes somehow disturbed, then we turn from the natural to the unnatural. We leave behind the world of order and we enter into the world of chaos. All right. So the king is a very important figure in this chain of being, because he is the representative of God on earth, right? He represents absolute power, authority, wisdom, justice, truthfulness, etc. Without the king, this chain of being cannot exist, because everything below that, below the king, you have ministers, you have farmers, soldiers, clergymen. All of those things depend on the king for their order, right? But we should realize that in King Lear, the king, he is now entering a phase of old age, right? He used to be a very powerful monarch, right? Somebody who, who had absolute control over his kingdom. But he is also a human being, and like all natural animals, we age, we become old, and ultimately we have to die, right? So that cyclical nature, right, of birth, youth, maturity, old age, and death, it is not something that even the king can escape, right? The king cannot escape from that. He is subject to all these processes. Okay. So just like day is followed by night, seasons change, drought is followed by heavy rain, summer is followed by winter. Lear is now entering the twilight of his life. Right? He's in the last phase. And in this last phase, his reason, his ability to use his judgment properly, is slowly giving way to senility. Senility means, when people get very old, they cannot think properly, they start acting in strange ways, right? So that is what a senile person is. And King Lear, even though he's king, even though he's a keeper of this natural order, he is now losing his ability to judge properly, right? So that is one thing. Along with this, we have another source of unnatural events, which is the breaking of some extremely crucial natural relationships, like the relationship between the child and the father, right? So that is a very powerful bond, right? Just like a king is serving God, uh, you know just like the ministers are serving the king, every son or daughter is supposed to be grateful and loyal to their parents, right, to their father and the mother. But when that natural order is broken, we have chaos, we have disharmony, chaos, and stormy weather. Okay. So we see the first sign of this happening in that scene where King Lear is questioning his daughters, and Cordelia says, I will love you only as much as is proper. So that is the first clue that uh, things are not going according to Lear's plan, right? We find that in even more, we find that out even more deeply when Lear goes and stays with his eldest daughter Gondrel, and she slowly says, "You cannot keep all your servants in my castle. I am not going to, put up with all your servants causing me trouble." Okay, and then he realizes that his daughter is not the not the caring, loving person that he thought she was. So look at the way that he scolds her, or he shouts at her. He says, "Ingratitude, thou marble hearted fiend, more hideous when thou showest thee in a child than the sea monster." So an ungrateful child is even more dangerous, even more ugly than a sea monster, right? So look at the metaphor or the image that King Lear is using. He says a sea monster is better than a ungrateful daughter, right? So we are comparing a daughter to a monster. A daughter is somebody who is part of that natural ordered relationship, and a monster is a being who is completely out of that. The very word monster means a warning, warning about something which is unnatural. Okay, so he continues. He says, he King Lear. This is King Lear speaking. He is addressing himself to nature. He says, "Hear nature, hear dear goddess, here. Suspend thy purpose if thou didst intend to make this creature fruitful. Into her womb convey sterility, dry up in her the organs of increase, and from her derogate body never spring a babe to honor her. If she must teem, create her child of spleen, that it may live and be a thwart disnatured torment to her. Let it stamp wrinkles in her brow of youth, with cadent tears fret channels in her cheeks. Turn all her mother's pains and benefits to laughter and contempt, that she may feel how sharper than a serpent's tooth it is to have a thankless child." Away, away. So basically, this is a curse, right? The father is cursing the daughter with sterility. He says, may you never have children, or if you have children, let them be ungrateful monsters like you are. Right? You have been as ungrateful to me as a serpent. Your venom has been more poisonous than a serpent's tooth to me. Right? So again, you see these elements from nature which are very dangerous, like a serpent, like a monster, like dangerous creatures. Right? These are the things that uh, King Lear is comparing his own daughter to. So right away we know that we are shifting from the system of order, from the system of proper natural things into a world of unnatural, improper, chaotic things. Right. So it's something which is going to happen even more when we get to the storm. Okay. Now, along with Lear, throughout this play, we find we find a parallel story which is happening. Right. Just like Lear has three daughters, his courtier, the Earl of Gloucester, he has two sons, Edgar and Edmund. Now, Edgar is the legitimate child and Edmund is the illegitimate child. Right? So, like Lear, Gloucester is also partial to one of his children. Right? He prefers Edgar more than Edmund because Edgar is the legitimate child. Right? And this causes a feeling of bitterness in Edmund, who says, uh, I am being branded as somebody who is unnatural, somebody who is not legitimate. So I must do whatever I can. I must become a villain in order to obtain what is legitimately mine or what I deserve. Right. So he has this whole theory where he says, I am no lesser than Edgar. I was born only a few months later than him, but that doesn't mean that I am any less capable than he is. I deserve as much as he does. Right? So I will do whatever I can. I will betray my father. I will destroy, this harmony between me and my brother, me and my father, in order to obtain what is mine. Right? So basically, what he does is he betrays his brother first. He causes his brother to be exiled. Later, he betrays his own father, and this causes Gloucester to be captured by Cornwall. And Cornwall, essentially, he blinds Gloucester. He gouges out Gloucester's eyes. Right? So this physical blindness of Gloucester, it becomes symbolic in nature, right? Because not only is Gloucester physically blind, he was blind to the true nature of his children. He did not understand that Edmund is a poisonous fellow. He did not understand that his partial treatment of his children was somehow causing Edmund to become bitter. Right? Yeah. So on the one hand, by trusting Edmund over Edgar, Gloucester was blind to the virtue of his children, as indeed Lear himself was when he disinherited Cordelia. So throughout this play, we have a parallel between Lear and Gloucester. Right? Later, Gloucester, after he is blinded, he is also, just like Lear goes out into the storm, Gloucester wanders alone in a heath. Heath is a place where nothing grows. It's basically a barren land, and he wants to commit suicide by jumping down from a cliff. Right. But luckily, he is blind. He cannot see. Not luckily, he's blind. He does not know where he is. So Edgar comes, and Edgar still loves his father, right? Even though he is sent to exile by him, he loves his father, and he says, "I will help you." He disguises his voices, and he says, "I will help you climb to the top of the cliff so that you can jump off." And once Gloucester reaches the top of the cliff, uh, you know, Edgar does not allow him to fall down. Instead, he just pushes him down and pretends as if Gloucester has actually fallen down the cliff and died. Right. So when Gloucester wakes up, he first believes that he is in heaven or hell or something like that. But then once again, Edgar changes his voices and says, "Look, you have fallen down from the cliff and you have survived." So like this, sort of like trying to rescue him by not, destroying his, expectations too much. But ultimately, Gloucester dies when he realizes that it is Edgar who actually saved him. Right? He's overcome with happiness and he dies. That is the same way that Lear will also die later out of a broken heart. Because when he realizes that his daughter Cordelia was killed, uh, basically his heart breaks and he dies. Okay. So anyway, it's very important to note that Gloucester is Lear's counterpart, his mirror, and throughout the play we have these two parallel stories which happen. Yes. So um, just like we discussed the difference between natural and unnatural, uh, we have the difference, the theme of legitimacy and illegitimacy. Okay. So uh, we can start right from the beginning. The very first decision which is taken in the play is dividing the kingdom, right? Normally a king is supposed to uphold the unity and integrity of the nation, right? So dividing the kingdom itself is actually an illegitimate act. By dividing the kingdom, you are actually uh, you know giving up or going against the principle that a king should protect, right, the unity of the kingdom, right? And then he disowns one of his daughters, his legitimate daughter, which is also something which is unnatural. You are not supposed to do that, right? You are breaking the fundamental relationship between a parent and a child by disowning your own daughter, right? So all of this describes, it is describing a break from what is natural, right? So that is one way. You take something natural and you break it, right? You destroy it. The other parallel movement which happens in the play is illegitimate relationships become accepted. So just like legitimate relationships are not accepted or are destroyed, illegitimate relationships become accepted. Like what happens to Edmund, right? Edmund is an illegitimate child who is never supposed to, inherit anything. But through trickery, he tricks his own brother and his father, and he makes his father, uh, you know, uh, give up his own estate. So he becomes the Earl of Gloucester, right? Which is also as improper as Lear disowning his daughter. Okay, so unnatural relationships asserts itself. Edmund betrays his father to regain his husband Cornwall, and the result of all these illegitimate, unnatural things happening is suffering. When it comes to Lear, he goes mad. When it comes to Gloucester, he's blinded and he's sent out into the heath. Right. All right. So we already discussed this a little bit. This is an excerpt. This is a few lines from the soliloquy in which Edmund is, asserting his own being, his own self. So he is also praying to nature, his goddess. Just like earlier we saw, a couple of slides earlier. Here we saw King Lear praying to nature. Here, nature, dear goddess. Just like that, we see Edmund praying to nature. Edmund says, "Thou, nature, art my goddess. To thy fault, to thy law, my services are bound. Wherefore should I stand in the plague of custom and permit the curiosity of nations to deprive me for that I am some 12 or 14 moonshines lag of a brother? Why bastard? Wherefore base?" So he's questioning his own position in the natural order. He says, "Why am I being called a bastard? Why am I being called base, which is, somebody who is worthless, right? Just because I was born a little bit later than my brother does not mean that I am worthless, right?" So like this, he is rewriting the rules of order, what is proper. And he says, I don't deserve this, this tag of bastard or base which has been given to me. Right? I will fight against it. Right? So, in search for legitimacy, Edmund is actually going against the customs which are laid down by nature. Okay. All right. So, one more relationship which is very fundamental to the order of nature is marriage, right? Matrimony. So this is a relationship which is supposed to be observed faithfully, where the husband and the wife ought to be faithful to each other. Uh, but in this play, we find marital infidelity. Right? We find that you know husbands and wives do not remain loyal to each other. So what happens is, after Edmund tricks his father and his brother, he becomes very powerful, and his power attracts both Gondrel and Regan to him. Okay, so Gondrel actually writes a letter uh, to Edmund, asking Edmund to get rid of her husband Albany, right? So that Gondrel can marry Edmund, and they can live together. And later on, even Regan is attracted towards Edmund, and this causes Gondrel to poison Regan. Because Gondrel wants to marry Edmund, uh, but she thinks that Regan is going to be some sort of a barrier, and Regan is actually poisoned by Gondrel, which leads to another problem, which is fratricide, killing your own brother, right? Your own sibling, your own sister, right? So all this comes from another breaking of the laws of nature, about fidelity, about uh, staying loyal to your husband, or the husband staying loyal to the wife. In fact, the only stable relationship that we can see in this play is the relationship between Cordelia and her husband, the king of France, right? That is a model relationship, because France decides to marry Cordelia even when she has lost all her inheritance, right? So France says, I will take her as she is. I don't need any wealth or any dowry in order to marry her. I will accept her for what she is. So that is a legitimate, that is a model relationship. But all the other relationships are unnatural. Right? Eventually, there is another fratricide which happens. Edmund is killed by Edgar. Again, a brother killing a brother. And the final unnatural thing which happens is Gondrel commits suicide, which is also considered to be against the laws of society, nature, etc. Killing oneself is it goes against all the principles of social responsibility, etc., ethics, whatever. Right. So this is a picture of King Lear out in the storm. You can see him opening his robes, baring his chest to the skies, saying, strike, strike me. I don't care if I am exposed to the thunder or the lightning or the cold. Uh, Basically, I have no shelter. I don't want any shelter. Uh, I will expose myself to the elements. So surrounding him, you see his, you know, loyal servants. Very few loyal servants. Probably this is Kent in disguise, and this probably is the fool, or this. I don't know which one, but the fool and the Kent, they are the servants who remain with him, who try to save him. Uh, Maybe this is Gloucester. Maybe because of the age, this looks like an older person, so this is probably Gloucester. And yeah, this may be Kent, right? Who is a little bit younger. Anyway, all right. So, like we said earlier, the storm is the central motif, the central element in this play, and it happens at the end of Act Two. Um, After being rejected by his daughters, the king flees into the wild night. But what he finds, he can neither command nor comprehend. Okay, so the king is somebody who is used to commanding, and everything is conducted according to his wishes. But he finds that nature is beyond his commands. Nature is beyond his jurisdiction, his authority. Right? You cannot command the wind or the thunder or the lightning, the storm. Right? So it's the worst experience that a king can have. It's demonstrated how little his authority is worth. Right? So the storm represents a crisis. Right? It's a crisis between the relationship between the human body and nature. Right? So normally, in normal conditions, nature is supposed to be a sheltering or nurturing influence, like in Aranyani or the other texts that we have discussed. Nature provides nourishment, shelter, comfort. Life itself is given by nature. But during this crisis, which is represented by the storm, nature represents danger. Right? There is nothing which is stable or safe. Stability has dissolved into disorder and chaos. Right? It is a moment of rupture. Rupture, again, it means destruction. It's the destruction of order. The body of the king, which is supposed to be very sacred. You might have seen very recently the coronation of King Charles in England, right? So it is a religious ceremony. Essentially, you have all these religious priests who come and bless the king, and after that blessing, somehow the king becomes a sacred person, right? He is holy, right? He is somebody who is directly chosen by God Himself, right? So the body of the king is very sacred, right? It's a holy thing, right? And that body is now exposed to the elements, and this is a contradiction. This is something like an absurd thing. It cannot be understood. Why is the king, who must be always defended, protected, etc., why is he out in the elements? Why is he exposed to the storm, right? And these external forces of the storm, they reflect the internal conflict that is going on inside the king's mind, right? So he has realized that he made a mistake by not trusting Cordelia, by placing all his you know trust with his eldest and the second daughter. He basically committed a mistake, right? And now uh, he's going through a mental sort of a, what do you say, uh, trouble, because he knows that what he did was wrong. So his own mind is in conflict, and that internal conflict is being mirrored by the external conflict of the storm. So he says, this storm invades us to the skin. So the storm is being compared to the invasion. Invasion is an attack by an enemy, right? So for a king, that is the most dangerous thing that he can face, an attack by your enemy, right? And that is what Lear is comparing his condition to. He's being attacked, right? All right. So again, during the storm, he is not the only person who is there. We also have Edgar, who is also exiled from his house by his father, um, and he is now forced to live as an outlaw, and he disguises himself as a madman called Tom O'Betlan. Tom O'Betlan, right? Um, so the storm also represents a shift from reason, normal, ordered thinking to madness, right? So the storm becomes a perfect backdrop for this madness, because although Edgar is pretending to be mad, after the storm, King Lear is going to become really mad, truly mad, right? It's not a pretend madness, it is actual madness. So we have a comparison between pretension and reality, right? The storm helps us to distinguish between what is just an illusion, the illusion of madness in Edgar, and the reality of madness in Lear. Lear sees Edgar in the storm and describes him as poor, bare, forked animal. So, bare means naked, fork means having two legs. So, essentially, in the storm, without shelter, humans are no longer humans. Humans just become animal like. They are just living things which seek to survive this untamed, uncontrollable fury of nature. Right? So, as long as we are at the mercy of the powers of nature, we are not humans, we are merely animals. Okay. So, later on, in scene Act 3, Scene 2, the first beginning of the first, the line 1 itself, we have a command from the king. The king says, blow wind, crack your cheeks, rage, blow. Right? He's commanding the storm to rage, to blow. Right? But these, non-human forces, these natural forces cannot obey the king. Right? So what does the storm do? The storm tears King Lear's white hair, and you know they basically destroy everything. They destroy everything and make everything into nothing. Right? It tears Lear's white hair, which the impetuous blast with eyeless rage catch in their fury and make nothing of. Right? So this make nothing of is a reference to something which happens earlier. Um, when King Lear asks Cordelia to describe how much she loves him, Cordelia says, nothing, I'm not going to say anything. Right? So King Lear responds, nothing. If you say nothing, nothing will come from nothing. Right? So if you say nothing, I will give you nothing. Right? So it's an actual quotation which, it's an actual line that he says. But now in the storm, we see actually nature making human beings into nothing. This king, this powerful person is now nothing. He is just an animal. He's less than an animal. Even animals, they know how to properly take care of themselves during a storm, right? They will seek a shelter, and they will limit their exposure to the wind or the rain or whatever. But King Lear is now less than an animal. He's nothing. And that is why he is exposing himself to the elements. Right? Yeah. So the wind is literally killing everything and making it nothing, and it is destroying the order of nature into chaos. So, in this storm scene, we see King Lear raging against his daughters as well as the wind. He says, he rages as much against the elements as his daughters, but yet I call you servile ministers that will with two pernicious daughters join your high engendered battles against a head so old and white in this. Oh ho, it is foul. So basically what he says is, even though he is facing a powerful storm, he says, the storm is actually a slave to his daughters, because the storm is helping his daughters to destroy him. Right? I am an old man, and yet these natural forces have joined with my daughters to completely destroy me. It is foul, right? It is such evil, right? Okay. So, yeah, by foul he refers jointly to the weather and his family, right? Both his family and the weather have turned out to be really treacherous. Both of them are evil. And he goes on, he says, you cataracts and hurricanes, spout till you have drenched our steeples, drowned the cocks. So he says, rain on, let the storm continue till the steeples are the highest, highest part of a church, basically. The spire, the tower, right? So let it rain till the entire church is all the churches and the cocks. The cocks are referred to the weathercocks. Normally, in at the roof, people used to keep these things which show the direction of the wind. It's called a weathercock. Sometimes it is shaped like the like a hen, right? It indicates the direction of the wind. So basically, Lear is saying, you can continue. Let the storm continue till the entire world drowns. So that's what he says in these next lines. Strike flat the thick rotundity of the world. Rotundity means roundness. Let the storm destroy the roundness of the world so that it becomes flat. Right? Crack nature's mold, all germane spill at once, that makes ingrateful man. So he's basically saying destroy nature. Let the storm destroy nature and end the power of nature to produce the next generation. Let the power to create be destroyed, because it is from the power to create that ungrateful human beings are also born. Let that be destroyed. Right? He is so bitter with his experiences with his daughters that he says, let nature be destroyed. So as far as we are concerned, because we are concerned with eco-criticism, the storm represents a moment of ecological crisis, right? It represents a life without equilibrium or order, right? So Shakespeare's words actually reflect not only a loss of order in relationships, it also reflects a loss of order in the natural world. The kind of difficulties which Lear has to face is a metaphor for the difficulties that human beings have to face in a world without order. Right? So when we are as foolish as King Lear, when we are as blind as Gloucester, when we don't realize the harm that is being done around us, we run the risk of suffering the same fate as Lear and Gloucester. Okay. So, that is in a nutshell the message that this play conveys to us, that we have to be mindful, we have to be uh, people who can see, right? Vision and blindness is a metaphor that runs throughout this play, and not only in Gloucester's blinding, but also how King Lear is also blind in a certain way, right? So as long as we are blind to what is reality, right? King Lear did not realize the true, real worth of his daughter, right? So as long as we human beings living in the 21st century, we do not realize the danger that each of our actions cause, we run the risk of repeating the same mistakes that King Lear has made in this play, right? So that is what the storm essentially tells us. Okay. Okay, so these are some of the main themes. I'm sure that the video has already become a bit too long, but these are the main themes that you should pay attention to in this text. Uh, I don't think you need to worry about any long essays coming from this text. Um, uh, you know, you might get short answer questions. Uh, so basically, focus on the main characters. You should know what happens during the storm scene, what happens with Gloucester and King Lear, those two characters representing the people who suffer, right? What happens with the daughters, the three daughters, as well as the two sons. So that is also something that you should know. Uh, and what else? Yeah, and the basic metaphor between legitimacy, illegitimacy, natural, unnatural. Now, these are the things that you have to pay attention to in this text. Okay, so I will wind up this video here. Uh, go through the text, and if you have any difficulty or doubt, do ask me. Okay.